What's going on, guys? So we're back behind our 2024 Ford F450 pickup truck, and we're talking about shank sizes as well as receiver sizes. Now, this video is probably going to upset folks that have a 1.5-inch receiver on their vehicle. I have excluded those from this because, first of all, I don't have any hitches that have a 1.5-inch shank, and secondly, those are typically going to be on much lighter duty vehicles that in most cases aren't really designed to tow or tow much at all. So I've excluded them from here. We've included hitches all from Gen Y, so I want to give a big shout out to my channel sponsor eTrailer.com and Gen Y. Without them, this video wouldn't have been possible. But I've included hitches, all three from Gen Y, with a 2-inch, 2.5-inch, and a 3-inch shank. Now, what is the difference? Why does it matter? And specifically, should you get one hitch over the other if your truck can handle a larger shank size than perhaps the one that you have or the one that you may be considering to get? So let's talk about that. Hang tight. I'll be right back. Okay, so when you think shank size, most people automatically assume that the larger the diameter of the shank, the better, the stronger, the more capable. And in some cases, that's true. In some cases, it comes down to the manufacturer of the hitch to determine what the capacity of their hitch is and if you need a larger shank size to meet that capacity. In terms of brands like Waysafe or B&W, the only way you will get the maximum capacity out of their product is if you get it in the largest shank diameter, which in most cases is going to be 3 inches. But if you are looking for something with an insane amount of capacity and hitch weight capacity, because you have your towing and your hitch weight capacity, don't think that you have to go to a 3-inch shank for that to happen. If you're looking at brands like Gen Y, you can actually get the maximum capacity capable in a 2.5-inch shank. Unfortunately, that's not going to be possible with a 2-inch shank, but you can get it in a 2.5-inch shank. Now, I'm not going over classes here because a lot of people just don't understand the class delineation between hitches and receivers. But let's just kind of go over the hitch side of it as well as the opening in the vehicle. Now, I have beat this horse completely dead talking about the fact that only from a pickup truck perspective is this Super Duty from 2017 and newer with the correct towing package and the correct hitch package going to include a 3-inch receiver. What's a 3-inch receiver look like? That's a 3-inch receiver opening. In many cases, they're going to come with a 3-inch to 2.5-inch to a 2-inch adapter or sleeve or reducer, whatever you want to call it. My channel sponsor, eTrailer.com, also carries some really cool magnetic ones. But that said, you're typically going to have some reducers, so you can reduce all the way down to 2 inches. Maybe in some cases even 1.5 inches, but I'm not 100% sure about that because I don't think I've ever seen a pickup truck, at least a larger pickup truck, that comes with a 3 to 2.5 to 2 to 1.5 inch sleeve. Now, all that said, people have asked me before, with a 3-inch diameter receiver, why have I opted to usually go with a 2.5-inch shank versus a hitch with a 3-inch shank that'll essentially plug in directly without the need for a sleeve or a reducer? And the answer to that is because I tow a lot of trailers, and oftentimes I tow with vehicles that are media loaner vehicles, and I don't have a 3-inch option for many of those loaner vehicles. If I have a General Motors, whether it's a Chevy or GMC, 1-ton dually pickup truck, I'm only going to have a 2.5-inch shank option. I will not have a 3-inch, which means if I have all my hitches in 3 inches, I won't be able to utilize them with that truck. Now, if I have a Ram, same thing. If it's a Nissan, same thing. Toyota, same thing. I might only have a 2-inch option, and having a 3-inch receiver is not going to do anything for me if I can't use it with a specific truck. So that's the reason why I've historically gone with a 2.5-inch receiver for my heavy-duty towing applications and a 2-inch receiver for my light-duty towing applications. Again, this is great for SUVs. This is great for like expeditions, navigators, half-ton pickup trucks, full-size SUVs. This is really good for that because they're going to have a 2-inch shank opening. Whereas your 3/4-ton trucks and 1-ton trucks from General Motors and Ram are going to have a 2.5-inch opening. And then if you have a Ford Super Duty equipped with a 3-inch receiver, you can fit a 3-inch shank inside of it. Now, again, the really cool thing about folks like Gen Y is that they produce a 2.5-inch shank that meets the maximum tow and hitch capacity as their 3-inch version. So if you're getting a 3-inch version over the 2.5-inch version, you're really only getting that so you don't have to use a reducer sleeve with your Ford vehicle. Now, something else to keep in mind, is it okay to use a 2-inch shank with 2 reducers, basically from 3 to 2.5 to 2, and utilize a hitch like this? The answer actually may shock you, and that is maybe, maybe not. I tell you this because if you're not careful, you can actually bend the pins that you're using to secure the hitch into the receiver when you reduce down too far. Why does that happen? Well, let's talk about it. So if I have this reducer inside of here, I have a 1/4-inch material on each side that reduces that hitch down from a 3-inch opening to a 2.5-inch opening, right? If I reduce that again down from a 2.5 to a 2-inch opening, that means I have a 1/2 inch of material on each side reducing this hitch down so it accommodates a 2-inch shank. Now, why is that problematic? Well, let's just kind of from a basic perspective understand where energy is actually being applied. So this is all shear force energy, which means when I throw a pin through here, the pin is really only capturing the material that's preventing the hitch from sliding out, which on something like this, or even if you have a 2.5-inch opening and you're reducing it to a 2-inch opening, it's only going to be the outermost diameter of your receiver. Now again, why does this matter? Well, if it's pulling against this material here, and you have a 2-inch shank that's pulling here, that means there's a 1/2 inch on each side of it that aren't doing anything to prevent this pin from being stressed. And in that case, what ends up happening is you can deform the shape of the pin because you're putting too much of a shear force and not enough surface material from your receiver to prevent the pin from being deformed. So that is something that happens to a lot of folks, believe it or not. They will have a hitch with a 2-inch shank that they were using in a lighter duty vehicle, perhaps a 1/2-ton truck. They move up to a 3/4 ton or a 1 ton and they tow with it, and all of a sudden they're getting some hitch pins that are getting bent. It doesn't happen nearly as much when you have a 2.5-inch receiver being reduced down to a 2-inch or a 3-inch to 2.5-inch reducer, because the space is not nearly as thick, right? You only have a 1/4-inch material on each side, so it's much more difficult to have the shear load needed to bend that pin. But when you are going from 3 to 2.5 to 2, again, that's a 1/2 inch material on each side, and this pin isn't actually able to load against that. So again, the lesson here is to understand that you don't absolutely need to get the largest shank diameter, in some cases, to get the maximum capacity out of a hitch. Again, brands like Gen Y do a great job of giving you an option between a 2.5 and a 3-inch shank without needing to go to the 3-inch shank to get your maximum towing and tongue weight capacity, which is really nice. Anytime you go to a 2-inch version of almost all hitches, you are going to lose capacity though. It's just inherent in the design. The fact that everything about it is going to be smaller, a little lighter duty. You're going to have a narrower opening between the different receivers. These are both going to be 2.5-inch openings. That's going to be a 2-inch opening. And again, the material thickness at this point could lend itself to potentially deforming if it was trying to handle the same amount of weight. But at 2.5 inches or 3 inches, in some cases, and you want to check with the hitch manufacturer, you can still max out whatever the highest rated hitch is with the 2.5-inch shank. And again, just remember what could potentially happen if you're using too many reducers and you're still trying to haul a relatively heavy load with a smaller shank. In Ford's case, it can be pretty easy to unintentionally damage your pin by going from a 3-inch to 2.5-inch to 2-inch, again, because you don't have any type of force preventing those inner sleeves from moving, and thus all of that shear force is being spread out and you have that spacing on each side of the shank that's going in here. So just keep that in mind. It is always best practice, though, long term, that you get the shank that fits the largest opening diameter of your vehicle. So if you have a 3-inch opening, it is best that you get a shank that accommodates a 3-inch opening. If you have a 2.5-inch opening, do the same thing. You may end up spending some more money, but at the same time, it's just always nice to be able to use the hitch without the actual reducers, because from a longevity perspective, it's less energy to have to deal with possibly pulling against too narrow of a portion of the pin. Anyways, guys, again, big shout out to the folks over at Gen Y and my channel sponsor eTrailer.com for supporting this video. This is the type of information people ask all the time, and I'm just trying to be really clear about just understanding, does shank size matter? Understanding what your vehicle's tow capacities, tongue weight capacities, payload capacities are super important, even more important in some cases than understanding this right here, because your hitches are always clearly marked, but your vehicle may not be. So definitely get a good understanding of what your capacities are from your vehicle, from a receiver standpoint, from a payload perspective, and then also understand what your hitches are, and then also understand what type of reducers you're using to make everything work. So this is just all good information to have, especially if you plan on towing. Digging in deep, getting really knowledgeable on your setup and what you're putting in the back of your vehicle is really important. And it can definitely help prevent disaster whenever you get on the road and you start towing. Anyways, guys, I sure hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, always practice safe towing techniques. It's just smart. It protects you and it protects the people on the road that are also driving next to you. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up. I'll throw links in the description of this video if these are products that you're interested in, and if it's time for you to upgrade to a larger shank size because you just want that extra peace of mind, or because you just think it looks better with the truck, you know, you have a great resource to do that with eTrailer.com. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, again, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you again very soon.